In your job and occupation, have you ever wondered if you should quit or stick with it to be able to move forward and learn more? That's a good question. I was reading a book called The Dip by Seth Godin, and he calls it the little book that teaches you when to quit and when to stick. Now, the reason why I picked the book at first was the fact that it has the word teach in the title, and I was curious to see what it was. But what is interesting is that many of us, when we have an occupation, we work for 2 years for a company, for example, or on a project. We work for 5 years. I've been a teacher for 20 years. And sometimes you start thinking about what is the next step? Are you on the right path, or is it time for you to consider different ways? And that book was quite enlightening in just having an intellectual adventure to figure out what you were thinking, what you're thinking. What's interesting is that we always wonder, what's next for me? What's the next step? What should I do? What should I not do? Because keeping in mind that we all have limited time and limited resources when we have a career, when we have ideas for what's the next step. And the big question is always to think about that, because you don't want to be a victim of what you do. You want to live life with intention. And that's the purpose of my mission, and also sharing with you the different things I learn as I go along. Now, here it's interesting because it mentions that if you are to do an occupation, you try to do something. One of the things you may want to think about is that you want to be the best version of yourself, or the best in the world, in your environment, in what you do. Well, being the best in the world is quite a big challenge. On the other hand, often when we're younger, we're thinking about that. I would like to be this doctor. I would like to be the best doctor. I would like to be an engineer. I'd like to be the best engineer. I want to be an actor or an athlete. I want to be the best in that environment. So it is part of our thinking as we go along. And I think it's important to keep that in mind as we are discussing this topic. Another one, so here I took some notes about what I read in the book, because it's always interesting to share with you what I learn as I go along. So these are my notes as I'm carrying this video. So on one of the pages, it mentions that if you're not going to put in the best effort in what you do, to be the best possible choice of career, of being involved in a project, or even for social reasons, then the main question is, why bother? Why do we do what we do? And why don't we want just to be the best possible? And the question is, if you don't want to be the best in that area, is it part of your personality? Or is it something that you have to think about? Okay, what is the next step for me? This is a good question, because if you think of high school, people go from grade 1 to grade 12, so which in some ways there's a progression. Every year we're going up 1 year, there's some learning happening, so there's a progression as we go forward. But once we finish high school, we may or may not go to college or university, in which case the learning may stop. Or maybe you might be in a situation where you're in a workplace and you're working all the time in improving your crafts. For the same reason, if you take an electrician, for example, an electrician will go to school, will learn on the job, and eventually will become, we all hope, a master electrician. A master electrician because it's someone who is the best in their craft in that area, or about something specific in their work. And I think it's important to do that. Now you have to keep in mind that there's some people, they just enjoy doing what they do, and they just feel quite satisfied. In which case, that's quite nice. It's honorable. And when I see someone that is doing the same thing over and over again, and they're still satisfied. I'm one of the case where I've been a teacher for 20 years, and I'm still satisfied over a long period of time with what I'm doing. On the other hand, when I was a geologist, I learned quite a bit for a while, and then I got to a point where if I wanted to be the best, I needed to be more in the field, be in more projects. And then that was to keep me further away from home. And for family, that was not the best solution. And that's why I decided to switch career. So, in some ways, if you are looking in some of the thoughts here in the book, I decided to quit geology with all the learning I had done for 5 years, all the experience I had, because for me it was the best for me, and then I became a teacher. The book here has an interesting graph I want to show you. So I don't know if we'll be able to see it nicely. So that's the graph they have here, and the graph goes there. We go. So let's see. We have okay. I don't have my glasses. That's not a good thing. Okay, let's see. 2 words. It's amazing. So we have results and efforts. I knew that. So here we have the result vertically and the time here as we go along. So what happens is when you start, you get to learn a lot of things quickly, and then the person becomes proficient at their job. And then what happens is they learn more, they can do more, and so on. But there are places where it's a gate here, and the gate here is like a gatekeeper. I remember when I was in university, in psychology, for example, for the first year they were accepting 400 students, but the course was difficult, and the plan was that only 100 would continue for year two. So there was a gate here. There was a lot of learning, but it would only accept the best people. So here, there's a gate right here. And then the more you do your work, then you becomes more proficient. And there's a little lull here in the graph, and that's what we call the dip. It's a place where you have learned quite a bit, you can do a lot, you have confidence in what you do, and it's working wonderfully. You're willing to work with others, you're willing to try new challenges, you're willing to do the work. If you are a parent, you're a wonderful parent. If you're a teacher, a wonderful teacher. If you're a manager, a wonderful manager. But what is interesting here with this information here is some people may decide to stay with time with the same results for their whole career. And that's all right. It is a person that is very satisfied with what they are. This book here is about the fact that at some point, some people may decide, okay, what I'm at a point here that I need something new, and then I could decide to either move forward and stay the same, I could decide to quit, or I could decide and give the efforts to go up here and achieve mastery. And this, if you think of an electrician and master the electrician I was mentioning earlier, someone learns about electricity, learns about contracts, and then there's a part here where some people will decide, well, electrician is not good for me, or it's not what I'm looking for. They will change career. And then you get to a person where they feel comfortable and they're part of the dip. They may decide to become an electrician in one field for the rest of their career, and that's wonderful. Some people may decide to accept more challenges, decide to do some more learning to become master electrician. So this graph is kind of interesting in the idea or the context of this discussion here. So here, this what Seth Godin is talking about his book is at some point you have to decide, are you willing to embrace the challenge? And the challenge is, are you willing to do what it takes to become a master at what you do? Because it's an interesting question, because there's a few things, as I mentioned. You could decide to let go, to continue at the same pace at what you do, or wanting to become the best, and therefore a master. So let's see what are some of the ideas that the book mentions as well. One of them is on page 30 and 31. It is easier sometimes to be mediocre and remain in the comfort zone than to quit, because quitting brings some risks, some unknown, and that's why sometimes you may know people that they're cruising to retirement. So that means that there's a few years left. They're not willing to try anything new. They're just happy where they are, and it's wonderful. And also, Seth Godin mentions that it's human nature to quit when things starts to hurt. So, for example, when things are difficult, people may want to stop. Sometimes, if you go to the gym and you do some physical activity, when it starts hurting, then some people will stop going. But at the same time, a couple paragraphs later, he mentions that it is in the reflex of quitting when it starts hurting that creates some scarcity. So that means that the people that want to become number one, people that want to be the master of their craft, they become scarce and more scarce with time. And the reason for that is many people decide not to pursue mastery, but sometimes just prefer to stay the same or to quit, in which case it increases their value because their skill levels increases and therefore they can bring more value to society, to their environment, or their own company even. So the whole so it goes from there. That so if you decide to join in and focus on mastery, so what happens is that you become committed. You become committed to yourself in your craft in what you do, but you also becomes committed to others. And in which case, that if you can be a master of your craft, you can help others in achieving the same goal. And it's quite nice as well in the workplace, and also shows perseverance, because often when things get hard, to be persevere to go over the obstacle, there's a lot of learning that can happen. That's when mastery can come forward. So it's quite nice to say that. And if you want to create mastery, what do you need to do? You need to build sometimes, you also need to build something new. You may have to reinvent or rebuild who you are, your skill set, or just add to your skill set to do more and more. For the same reason, a few years back, I decided to do video for my students and for other people outside of my classroom. I was still in the same field, teaching, but I decided to go beyond the classrooms and to go on the web. That was quite risky. It was very nerve-wracking for me. I still feel uncomfortable once in a while. It's not, because as an introvert, it's not always easy to do so. But you know what? The rewards are amazing. So in his book, he always talks about the fact that there's nothing wrong with deciding to quit at what you do. For the same reason, as a geologist, after 5 years, I said, okay, it's enough for me. Before I invest more time and more energy, more resources, it's time for me to stop. And he mentions that if you decide to stay, then may as well be exceptional. So his idea is you want to quit or be exceptional. That was a Seth Godin idea. And some ideas he had too is that sometimes when you start a contract or a project, you could decide to, how do you say that? He says that to quit before you start. And the way he was mentioning it was the fact that, okay, some people, maybe some people in the audience will say, okay, I'm ready to give 6 months or 12 months or 18 months to a project. If it works well, I'm ready to continue. If it's not what I'm looking for, I already know that I'm ready to step back and not continue. And I think that's quite interesting as a perspective, because you no longer become um, reactive, but you do what you do intentionally. And I think that's quite nice. There's something else that I was mentioning as I was reading the book. They often talked about human resources in a company, and human resources is how you manage employees within a company. And in one of the sentences, it says that most companies will have in mind that workers will quit, either because they don't like what they do, maybe there's something that is not working well, or all kind of reasons. So that's the purpose of HR, to protect the company in its entity and in its identity, and protect them from different situation. But what is interesting though is that when you are thinking that HR is important, there's also the fact that you can use HR to your advantage. So, for example, as part of HR, they are working with promotion within the same company, for example. So, when you have a promotion, what does it mean? That means that you are, or you were in the department, something new happens and you are promoted. Sometimes you're promoted to another team, to another division. So, what happens is that you are moving up as a promotion, but at the same time, you are quitting your team. You're quitting where you were. You're quitting the the projects you were in. So that's something you have to keep in mind, because as you move forward, the team you were with are at that point in need of replacing you. So that's why HR has to keep in mind all these movements that are possible. So when there's a promotion, I have a side note here is that you are quitting a project, or you're quitting a team, or you're quitting a position. So the idea is not that quitting is not acceptable. Quitting is the idea that you do what works for you and what's best in where you are. Either as you are part of a company, you may decide a few years that's what you want to do, or you might be in a career, you say, okay, I want to give myself, I don't know, a whole career with the same company, which is great. In which case, you have to decide, do I want to be the best employee I can be, or do I want to become the best I can be within the environment of the company or beyond? These are all good in all good topics and interesting ideas, and all this can be summarized in this graph here from Seth Godin. As a scientist, I like graphs, and I always thought it was something interesting when you look into that. On this, I want to know, what is that one thing that you're doing right now that you are master at? Some of you could be from your job, other people, your hobbies, other people, people you meet. Amazing communicator, amazing um, team leader, amazing project leader, amazing video gamer. I don't know. Tell me, what is that one thing that you're mastered at? Because we are all master at something. On this, thank you very much. I'm going to put here another video, and I can't wait to read your input.